You can go ahead.
Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of our webinar series here at the Appalachian Foodshed Project. We often have presenters that help us think about community food security, both in our region and in general. And so today we are very lucky to have our very own Kim Niewolny, Michelle Schroeder-Moreno, and Becca Landis present on the graduate course that was created and implemented here at Virginia Tech in partnership with NC State around community food security. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim and Becca and Michelle and let them take it from here.
Thank you, Nikki. This is Michelle Schroeder-Moreno. I thought we could just first start with, well, first welcome again, everyone. And I think also just to point out, if there are any questions, that you can use the chat tool, and Nikki will help us with that. But I thought we could first start off and do a bit of intro of ourselves and our background. At NC State University, I direct our agroecology program, which is a undergraduate program, and we are developing, we have a minor in concentration and looking towards developing a major. So this part of the project in education was really near and dear to my heart, and I really appreciated the opportunity to work across institutions with Virginia Tech. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and then we could hear a little bit from Becca too.
Great, thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon, everybody. This is Kim Niewolny at Virginia Tech, and I'm in the department, as you can see there, agricultural leadership and community education, and my focus really is participatory in community education and development in food systems. And this end of our AFRI project has been, as Michelle said, really, near and dear. That's a good way to put it, Michelle. We at Virginia Tech, we have developed a food systems curriculum at our undergraduate level, and also have several different types of courses kind of pocketed across the university around food and agriculture and systems work. However, nothing specifically targeted around food security or specifically community food security. And this was really so timely in many ways. And so happy to participate in that work and to be teaching the class. So I want to pass it on to Becca to speak a little bit about her background and how she's going to contribute today.
Hi, everyone. Becca here. I am a second-year master's student at Virginia Tech in the Department of Agricultural Leadership and Community Education. Kim is actually my advisor, and I've been working on the AFP now for a year on the practitioner profile portion of the project, which is focusing on practitioner narratives and learning from practitioner stories and experiences. And my research interests are along those same lines as well. And I took the class.
Very important perspective. Thank you, Becca, and thank you, Kim. So if you don't mind, Kim and Becca are going to kind of pop back and forth, and I'm going to handle the first part of the presentation up until about slide 7. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through. Now, again, as we mentioned, that this graduate course is part of our larger Appalachian Foodshed Project, or AFP, and what this is a USDA AFRI-funded project, a 5-year project, enhancing food security by cultivating resilient food systems and communities. So a place-based foodshed analysis from research to community practice. And like probably many of you know, that within these projects, sometimes the lines are a little bit blurred between, I would say, education, extension outreach, as well as research. And what I mean by that is we really try within the research to engage our students, both both undergraduate and graduate, and within the education, try to really think about how we can engage with our community partners as well as part of the research. This project runs the Appalachian regions of Western North Carolina, the Appalachian regions of Virginia, and all of West Virginia. And I am the co-PI for North Carolina. So what we're going to do today, just kind of give you a brief overview of the overall project, and then really spend a good amount of time talking about the food security course development and process, and I'll talk about that, and then turn it over to Kim to talk about the development of the course, which ended up being just taught at Virginia Tech, and its course goals, topics, and assignments, and then some student insights, both from the whole course as well as, I think, Becca. And then we wanted to make sure we have some time at the end, and a good amount of time, just to have I would say, discussion and answer questions. We realize that there is a lot of folks that are interested in food security from the education viewpoint, and we've done some look nationwide at what's being taught as well as what's taught within food system courses and food security. So to kind of give you an overview, we have three main points. We're using a food shed concept to address the issues of community food security in all of Western Virginia and the Appalachian regions of North Carolina and Virginia. And so that's real different than just looking at individual food security, but looking at from a whole community perspective, and in a holistic way. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we used a community-based research approach, and the Appalachian Foodshed Project, or AFP, hopes to enhance and facilitate work in the region by creating a network of organizations and individuals. We realize that there's a lot of work already going on, whether it's focused in sustainable agriculture, healthcare, agricultural economic development, urban gardening, social justice, and we really wanted to make sure, I guess, to understand it with the real hub on food security, but making sure those connectors or their spokes in a holistic way, and organizations working broadly were working together to really focus on food security. And so we collaborate with a variety of different individuals in the community organizations, from cooperative extension to NGOs to healthcare, farmers, policymakers, nonprofits, as well as a variety of other institutions. And that whole focus is to improve food access and availability while enhancing viable food economies. And so now this graphic tells you a little bit about what we're doing and how we work together. Again, the real focus on community food security, and working across the states. We have, to get to this point, we've had working again with the aspect of working with the community in different search conferences and capacity building forums, where we create a common agenda among researchers, among students, as well as community participants, collaborating together and forming action groups we have in each state advisory teams focused on food security, that represent this holistic from the community perspective. And we have some very specific outcomes, of course, with any grant project, and the graduate curriculum is one of the grant deliverables right here. And as well as we're also doing community food security assessments, and we have community food security enhancement grants in each one of the three states, where it's enhancing kind of aspects of food security projects within the community, as well as we have a modeling piece. So like any large project, there's a lot of moving pieces. It kind of looks like cogs in a machine, but really I don't see the curriculum standing on its own, but it's connected to many of these things, including the food security assessments and and of course, our partners along this. One thing that we did, and before developing the content of the course, we wanted to understand what was out there at the national level as far as types of courses, and we kept our net very broad. We did a preliminary analysis of food system courses with kind of some main objectives to describe current food system courses, what the content was about, levels, so was it a graduate, undergraduate, or a mixed, but importantly, because of our focus with communities on this project, is ways that these courses nationwide were engaging students with community. And we wanted to understand, were there kind of, I would say, key components, either content or even kind of measurable objectives or learning assessments for teaching food system courses. We kept our net very broad because we realized there was a lot of food system courses that had an aspect or significant components of food security. And so some of the things we found where the numbers come from is where we could have access to a syllabus. So there was about 17 courses nationwide that either had that were called food system or food security. A majority of those were at the graduate level, 70%, and then some, about 18%, were graduate and undergraduate. Lesser amounts at the undergraduate level, about 12%. But when you looked at the curricula and the syllabus, about close to 40% had some aspect of community engagement, whether that was a kind of research project where it was a food security assessment. It could have been just an interview with a community member or an aspect of service learning. So we have not gone deeper to really talk about what that component was. One thing that I was very interested in is what really was getting taught. And there was a very diverse curriculum and content, as probably many folks can imagine, because food systems is a very broad title, and there was no strong common content. It kind of also depended upon who was teaching it and the expertise that they brought, or the specific program that it was in. And just to kind of show you a little bit, when we looked at aspects either that were on the syllabus from the 17 courses, and again, this is grouping all the graduate and undergraduate together. There was food system definitions, of course, came up, but these were some of the main ones. But you can see that these are very broad still. The impacts of globalization and industrialization on food, environmental impacts of either food production or larger food system, social justice issues, economic development, food policy and planning, community education and participation. That's something that we were very interested in, and to a lesser extent, some aspect of farmland preservation, and even the interaction of food and faith communities. And just to note, this is not published yet. This is just kind of preliminary analysis of these food system courses. And I'm going to transition over to Kim and to really talk about kind of how this was developed into a course at Virginia Tech, and what they were doing before, and then what they're doing now, and how they interacted with, again, our Appalachian Foodshed Project community members. But again, the course was developed, content and some research aspect together with NC State. We didn't end up teaching it, unfortunately. We didn't have enough students that registered. Okay, I'm going to transition to Kim.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, every good course, every good learning experience has its own story. So this story for us at Virginia Tech, I'm one of the project co-directors, and so like Michelle, have my hands in many different aspects of this larger Appalachian Foodshed Project. But so the curriculum really for me is embedded it does sit alone on one hand, but it really does, we try to tie it to the other arms of the project, which makes sense in so many ways, but also it feels like the right thing to do based on the kind of work that we're trying to do in the course. But for us at Virginia Tech, our experiences with where we taught the class really started back in 2013. And we had an undergraduate course titled Concepts in Community Food Systems that was taught in our College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. However, we had a really growing body of graduate students who were requesting their own class. And that was loud and clear from them that they wanted to have that opportunity. And so we decided to create a special study course, and I taught that in the spring of 2013. And we just titled it Advanced Concepts in Community Food Systems, given a similar titling to that. However, it was a course of 12 graduate students. And so it really, that kind of generated naturally from the student body. And at the very same time, as good things do happen, the story in the community with the Appalachian Foodshed Project was bubbling up around how community partners may also then connect to the course material, as we were having our Virginia community partner working sessions, as we often have, we meet quite a bit. We had an update and we discussed the course coming up and how people might want to connect and around a variety of different topics and issues. And the community partner interest was there from the get-go, and in fact helped really structure the class, in that we took on a course-based action research approach. I've done different types of action research in the community and also have clearly done that in a variety of different ways, but never fully on in the classroom. I've used a lot of participatory learning approaches, but literally walked into the classroom with a one-page description, and the description was pretty blank. It essentially was students were going to grade themselves, and we were going to figure out the rest together. And that was really tied to the goals of the AFP and our community partners who work with us. And it was really an amazing learning process for me as a educator, but designing the syllabus, implementing it together, and co-evaluating it as we went through. So we treated it like a community development process from the get-go. That was, I think it worked well. I mean, I honestly say I think it worked well. However, we knew that would be something that wouldn't necessarily be, we would duplicate it like that again, because like most things that are really embedded in our community settings or embedded with particular body of students, that's going to be very specific to that conversation, to that learning, and those people involved. However, we did take some things away from this class that we tied to the new one. So that's why we wanted to bring this up now. One of the things that we'll talk more about in a little bit was the community partners were very interested at the time, and still are, in sharing their practices, their stories of work. And we're kind of framing them as stories of community food work. And what does that work look like? How are people learning from the incredible complexity of food security in their localities, in their communities, and across the Appalachian region? And so that started us working toward creating a narrative research project to interview and collect narrative stories of community food work. And sorry about that, I just had to hit my spacebar to make my computer live again. I'm going to go back. Those stories really helped us launch a whole effort of work in the AFP, but it really started because of the class and the community partners wanting to embed that work into the class. So I just think that's a really nice illustration of how our project has some, those different folks came together, as Michelle had described earlier. These are just some pictures from the course and going on some field work with our partners and together out in the field. So the next step was to really take a step back and reflect on that experience. And our goal was to always bring this together across the two universities. West Virginia University has interest to learn from what we're doing. However, they were not primed yet to take on a graduate course. So we decided that North Carolina State University and Virginia Tech would be, we would lead that effort together and share, of course, what we're learning as a whole. So we decided to, again, what we thought was really valuable was to focus on a student approach. And what I mean by that is we as educators probably have one hand have a sense of what we can do and what creativity can we apply and how we are working with our community partners. But to really kind of change the conversation a little bit to focus on how are our graduate students desiring what are their interests in this topic area of community food security. And so really these 4 points are just that we really needed to understand their current knowledge and their experiences. Clearly these are highly, experienced individuals in their graduate programs who bring a wealth of knowledge to the planning table. So we thought we needed to kind of start with that perspective. We also wanted to know, as Michelle's earlier slides, there's so many topics and approaches we can take. How can we start developing a course that's rooted in those kind of foundations? What kind of topics do our graduates want to bring to the forefront? And of course, what kind of community engagement opportunities can we help structure together based on those interests? We also were interested in course design and how we want to assess the learning, and that means, asking students what might be some appropriate places for us to focus on, and everything from looking at different experiential and community engaged frameworks to understanding what kind of, how much participatory design do they want to see in the class. And then finally, we really thought it was important to understand both their educational goals as well as their career goals, as well as how that ties to our AFP stakeholders. So trying to, that trifecta there, trying to match what was important to a variety of different learning partners and moving that forward. So that really meant for us looking at a more ephemerological qualitative research approach with a focus group sessions at both universities. So just really briefly, we can talk more about this, but I think we wanted just to share that we did do 4 focus groups, 2 at Virginia Tech and 2 at North Carolina State University. And we actually ran those together. Both a graduate student and a faculty member facilitated those per location. And we were really trying to target as wide of a community as possible in terms of graduates. The students, we wanted to make sure that it was not, we tried to make sure it wasn't in one particular discipline or program of study as much as we could, so we recruited as widely as we could. However, I know Michelle and we talked about this quite a bit. At Virginia Tech, we had a pretty good diverse, faculty of students across the university. Almost all of our colleges were represented. I know, but Michelle at NC State, I think you described, you had more production-oriented departments represented.
Yeah.
About that.
And yeah, thank you, Kim. And we do have a graduate focus in sustainable agriculture, so we've had a variety of students do sustainable agriculture research, primarily at the Center for Environmental Farming Systems, and we've had a previous graduate level course in critical issues in sustainable agriculture. So because of that history and context of where our students normally are coming from, while we did, email and recruit across the university, I think it was primarily students from, let's say, soil science, horticulture, animal science, crop science, entomology, and then a few, I think, of ag extension education, sociology.
And we had a good distribution, urban planning, folks in horticulture, folks in our agricultural leadership and community education, food science. I think we even had some folks in liberal arts. And so that was in terms of the focus groups, which was really exciting, and students who were both domestically and internationally focused. So that was, thought we had a really good spread with that. So we took the focus groups, we transcribed them literally line by line, analyzed them using Atlas TI, and I think that was actually another presentation for us, but we wanted to kind of highlight a few main points that came out of that for the purpose of learning how we want to develop a course, which was something for both, some of our things were a surprise, other things were not. One thing that was not a surprise is that there was a strong interest, and that matched our interest into designing more of an interdisciplinary course, meaning not just multidisciplinary, bringing them together, but trying to pose more broad questions that kind of capture so many different perspectives and issues around things like food security, making sure that the disciplinary base and the ways we would pose questions in the course were really grounded in an interdisciplinary kind of knowledge base as well as inquiry. So it's not just the literature or just people talking from different disciplines, but really trying to meld those together. A strong interest in understanding the relationship between the larger discourses of food security and the larger discourses of the emergence of food systems. Both have their own set of, discursive language, or sometimes even rhetoric, if you will. But I think that was really important to the students, that we were trying to put a lot of energy into understanding the historical lineages of these bodies of work from a theoretical and practical and a policy level. And that, of course, means a lot of coverage. So nonetheless, that's where people had interest, and that's what we really needed to kind of get our head around. Also, domestic international perspectives and literature were both strongly encouraged, and which, again, showed a wide breadth of interest there. And one point I thought was really interesting was, quote, real world application, which I think we can challenge what that means. However, the notion of really, one student I remember in the focus group defined it well, in that we're really good at critique, and we enjoy critique, if you will, in a graduate course experience. But how can we look at sort of the asset opportunities that are in our communities and really think about how, if we are going to be scholar practitioners and engaging with the complexity of food security, how are we able to connect and actually do something about it? And so it wasn't just like apply things, it's really to pose the questions in a different way that allowed for the critical kind of practitioner lens to come forward throughout the class. So I think that was pretty interesting, as well as exploring what it means to be in a community-engaged course. Everything from service learning to doing I think someone just wanted to have a 12-week international study abroad experience. So all that sounded fascinating. So we were just trying to put that in perspective. And something I didn't put on the slide, however, was a strong interest in grounding this conversation in the Appalachian Foodshed Project, however, not exclusively. So this is just a quick slide of a poster presentation that one of our graduate students, Garland Mason, took leadership in, and we presented that here at Virginia Tech through a higher education, our CITER conference that we do every year, and it's really on focusing on teaching and learning in higher ed. And it is just, so if any of you would like to have a copy of the poster, we can send that to you as well, to kind of give more of the details of the focus groups. So moving us fast forward, I know there's a lot to go with this. Michelle and I, with Garland Mason, other graduate students, and Amanda, Michelle's graduate student, we definitely worked for several weeks to take that information and really kind of pull it together, and then pull it back into the communities where we worked in our Appalachian Foodshed Project. And then also as educators, we kind of have a sense what could work and what we wanted to challenge ourselves with. So that is a big, long story, so we could talk more about that. But I know Michelle and I both, we advertised in our course in universities, and we had different names for our courses, even though we had a kind of a shared curricular base. But we knew it was important to have tie-in both through the curriculum and well as be able to share, like Michelle has a set of expertise that I do not have, and we would love for her to share her agroecology experiences and North Carolina experiences, while I could share the work we do with our narrative inquiry work and vice versa. So how could we do that, right? So we decided to teach these courses separately, but share a baseline curricula and share resources and really kind of bridge it across that way. However, as Michelle said, their course wasn't able to run this spring due to perhaps not as many numbers as they all need. However, I know you all, Michelle, have interest in offering this course again. So what I think we're going to do now, the next couple slides, is just kind of go through this kind of quickly, because I know we were at 2:30. We want to make sure there's some time for Becca to talk about her experiences and then open up for some discussion and questions. But I know some of you have already asked for the syllabus, and by all means, we'd be happy to send that to you. And next fact, we can send both syllabi, the one from the previous class, and you can see how bare boned that was compared to what we did with the second time here, this class. Which is a different class. I want to make sure it's clear that when I taught this class this past spring, we had a different titling, we had a different approach, but there were some things that we definitely brought back into the classroom. So the first time, and then clearly learning from our focus groups and our community partners and their interests. So we titled the course, as you can see, Food Security and Resilient Communities, Food Systems Theory and Praxis. Just really briefly note on that, we wanted to be very, very clear that this course was, when you label things like food security, people have different notions of what that means. And so having the notion of resilient communities meant that we cared a lot about the dialogue around educational development agendas. We really wanted to make sure that this had a hook, if you will, around community development. And so people knew that what they might be getting themselves into. Also, we wanted to recognize that there would be some scholarly theoretical work and exploration, but praxis was very important, that we really wanted to marry theory and practice together and have a praxis conversation throughout the class. So just wanted to give you, titles are funny things, and I always like to, it's fun to have a lot of words up there. And then we just called it the food security class after that, I suppose. But so this was a graduate level course. This is some of the language that was in the syllabus, and just sort of disclaimers and advertising what we put out there to our communities. And we wanted to really be clear this was trying to be a critical course. Nothing is off the table in terms of making sure that we brought hard questions and difficult subject areas, and that interdisciplinary perspective was tightly tied to that critical notion. Again, related to both food security and the emerging discourses around food systems. So again, we kept that as a core. Participants, really, we did hook it around the issues, the complexity around food security. And in my next slide, we'll talk more about what we mean by a wicked problem. And as I mentioned, educational and development agendas were really at the core of this course. And of course, the AFP was both the practical and the theoretical sort of backdrop to pop in and pop out of. And this was actually on the second page of the syllabus. And so many of you are probably familiar with Michael Hamm's work and sort of the Hannon-Bellows 2003 definition of food security. We didn't use necessarily that definition as our disclaimer for the class. It was what we brought into the class along with many other literatures. However, this was a really nice quote from his 2009 paper. And if you're familiar with the paper, I think it's just a reminder of it. It talks about developing a healthy food system and the models to do that. And I thought this quote was so nice to really bring the class to a similar place, as we were all coming from different directions, and we kind of like that. Like at the same time, have a common footing. And it really wasn't about portraying this here's a model and go off and be prosperous and have the problems fixed, but to recognize food security as a wicked problem, and knowing that the systems within the system of food and agriculture are themselves at different scales have different political implications, have different stakeholders, and we needed to really have a set of guidelines and vernacular and strategies to talk about improving that situation. And so that, I think, again, this really helped frame us in a variety of different ways. So these were some of our learning objectives. As I read them again, it's kind of funny how you go back after you teach the class and you wonder if you really did do that. And I'll let Becca answer that question. But we did focus on, theories and practices and discourses relating to food systems. Conceptual and programmatic definitions, that was a big piece, was sort of defining and redefining what we mean by food security from a variety of localities and regionalities and international literatures and perspectives. And really bringing in the critique around scholar practitioner participation. What does it look like? Who's involved? Who needs to be involved? Agents of change in the food system. And really, I think for me, one of the most important objectives was to incorporate, having students be able to incorporate, at the end of the day, food security, quote, concepts and strategies into their personal lives, into their professional world for socially just ends. And we don't mean that just in terms of what does socially just ends mean, sounds good. We were not hiding from the fact that this was highly rooted in issues around food justice and social justice. And we needed to talk about that. That meant rolling up our sleeves and asking some hard questions of ourselves. And I think that kind of ties it back to the third bullet point around scholar practitioner participation in the food system. So really briefly, these are main concepts that we discussed or brought forward. This is the main core areas. There's other ones, but these were some major ones that we focused on, and we could break them down into sub-themes, but I thought these were the major concepts. Food security and hunger, those relationships, the idea of food security, community food security as its own sort of body of work and activity, food sovereignty, starting mostly internationally, but what does it mean when we bring it to local Appalachian communities? The notions of resiliency, which is a really huge concept in itself, and I know the graduate students were really interested in tying agricultural sustainability to the questions of food security, which I know Michelle did a great job of bringing that to the forefront. Topics were not, these were some of the topics that we included, but not limited to. A lot of interest in definitions and policy, the relationship between agroecology and sustainability. We focused a lot on community food assessments. Nikki Diadamo-Damery came in that week and talked about what we're doing in the Appalachian Foodshed Project, and we tied it to some of our frameworks, such as the whole measures for community food systems. And we spent several weeks on food justice. We never, ever stopped talking about food justice, and that was some really exciting couple weeks and hard weeks as well, and worth those I think long conversations in the classroom as well as in the community. We also, it always comes back to issues around neoliberalism and globalization as large social frames and economic frames. And I was hoping that we always brought it back to those strategies and approaches for change. And so, and just to be clear, the course has several different assignments. Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I'm gonna do this first, and then I'm gonna go into the assignments because it kind of explains why those themes existed. So, but let me do this one first, and then we'll go forward. The AFP did provide as a local context. We had AFP stakeholders, both some of the faculty and practitioners came into the classroom via web connections or through, literally coming into the classroom. We also had the opportunity to go to the Virginia Farm to School Conference, which was our first held conference here in Virginia, and we were able to visit City Schoolyard Garden in Charlottesville, and a shout out to Jeanette Abinader for hosting us at the Schoolyard Garden, and just a wonderful opportunity to connect what we're doing in the communities around assessment work in community gardens and school gardens. So just a really great opportunity there. And we also had pretty strong connections between our participatory learning approaches, critical pedagogy, and, as we mentioned earlier, some critical practitioner frames. So it wasn't just these are topics, these are just ideas. This is how do we then engage as change agents? And because this was hooked as a community development course, we needed to think about how we critically pose questions and try to bring facilitative ideas to the table with communities, and that means kind of understanding what we mean by critical pedagogy and what we mean by developing a critical practitioner frame for yourself. So what did we do in the class? Really had four major components in terms of what the graduate students had to prepare. However, yeah, they're really tied together. The weekly reflection papers were students critically engaging with the concepts of the week and writing short 2-page papers, and we, I would give feedback every week, and we brought them into the classroom, and they were really designed for preparation and critical engagement. Students were also then, we did a lot of open session planning in the class, where students were given a good chunk of the syllabus to design in terms of what themes and what readings they would want to be responsible for entirely. So they were given 90 minutes per week to actually lead the class. And so that meant starting on the certain part of the syllabus was blank. The first part I provided some structure for, unlike the first time I taught the class, which was completely blank. But we knew we had some starting points based on our focus groups and some of our interests. But students we designed together the thematics, the groups, the readings, and then the activities, and they self-assessed. They would write a reflective paper after their sessions and give themselves their own grade based on how they believe they performed. We also had embedded our community food work narrative research that we started back in 2013, and this meant we had each of the students were partnered with a different Appalachian Foodshed Project associated practitioner, and they did interviews. Those interviews were about 90 minutes long, and there was really a 4-part assignment. Had to interview, transcribe, start to analyze, and then to actually write a reflective analysis to that process, to that narrative story. And that's an ongoing work. We have close to about 48 total practitioner stories across the region, and the students were able to contribute to a few more in this class, which was really super, and that was exciting. And Becca's been a part of that from the very beginning. So that was their major, if you will, assignment that they turned in the end. And some of these students didn't have even qualitative research skill set. So we really had to focus on making sure that we could use this as a learning experience together and always bringing that back into the class. Some students had more strength with that area, which was great because they could provide leadership. I mean, Becca, for example, was able to really help show students ways in which you would use a narrative to tell a story and to really use it as a teaching tool in itself. And then the last piece, a quarter of the grade for the entire class, was the students literally just assessed their participation. And they wrote their own reflective statement on how they performed as a learner, as a stakeholder in the class. And that was, I always do that in my classes, but that varies on how much. And I love to always I love that for, like the last class, it was over half of the class was their participation grade. And they decided, I don't change it. The only time I change it is if they're too hard on themselves, which they sometimes are. It's unnecessary. But the point is that these are the participants in the course are their own change agents. They need to create those evaluative skills for their own, reflexive participation in their learning as well as the learning of their peers and the stakeholders they worked with. So this was, to me, something that's pretty important to keep in the class and to kind of foster throughout. And my students, I don't know, Becca can speak to this, but I know you've had classes with me before, but some students this is new to them, and they're kind of unnerved by it. But I think unnerved in a good way, that they're given the space to think about what they learned, how they contribute to others' learning, and then really what it means to be a student in a classroom that has a community-engaged, goal. So I'm going to toss it over to Becca to bring us all home in terms of her experiences and her insights on the class.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just talk here for a few minutes about my experience and share some of the lessons and reflections I've been thinking about as a student of this class and then also as a hopeful practitioner after I graduate. So to start off, like Kim said, this class did cover a lot of ground. We talked about a lot of different alternative food work programs and projects and discourses and critiques. And some of this was new to some of the classmates, and some of it was kind of review, but it made for a really great discussion, especially combined with the fact that our class was so interdisciplinary. The content was interdisciplinary, but also the students were interdisciplinary. We had a lot of different departments represented in the students, and that was really, really great for me, because instead of just being in your own bubble and having dialogue with people who think similarly, you're challenged by their different thoughts, and sometimes they're opposing, and so you really have to go back and think about why you're framing it the way you are, and you need to start thinking about it in a new way. Another thing that really stood out to me about this class was the emotion that was in the class, the emotion that we felt about the readings, and a lot of the readings related personally to a lot of the people in the class, and so I'm really glad that we were given the space to do that in the class. I don't think that happens very often in graduate level courses, and so I really appreciate that. Also, the weekly critical reflection statements were a way for us to begin to work through the readings on a personal basis and make sense of what we're reading and start to link what we're reading to what we have read in the past. And so one thing that they really helped me with was grappling with my own theory of social change is something I've really been thinking a lot about. Good conclusions for the moment in my own head about social change and how to create social change. I'm thankful for that we were challenged with those hard questions rather than just being given the quote-unquote correct answer. So I'll talk a little bit here about the third part of the semester, student-selected themes that we got to ourselves, and we worked together as a class to figure out what these themes were going to be and who we were going to work with to pick out readings and to share them with the class and then to facilitate. And this was a good way for us to go deeper into a topic that we had briefly touched on before, but we wanted to learn more about, or to bring a whole new topic into the classroom that maybe we didn't get on earlier. And so this was a good learning experience to partner with people in leading a class and to practice different facilitation styles and to see the styles that other people use too. And then, so our final culminating assignment was the practitioner narrative assignment. And I love these. I've been doing them for a year on my own, and so another one. But I really liked this assignment because instead of just reading more literature at the end of the semester and writing a term paper about it, we got to talk to people who are actually doing the work. And so this community engagement aspect of the work and showed us different realities of doing this work. What does it actually look like on the ground? And then we took these narratives and we began to relate them back to the themes and discourses we've been learning about all semester. So it connected the more conceptual and theoretical work to the on-the-ground practice, which I think is really valuable, and it's that whole issue of praxis, which is the title of the class, so I thought that was perfect. And so I just really appreciated the overall structure and the content of the class. Painful and it was challenging, but it created new opportunities for me to engage with community food work, which I've been learning about for the past 2 years. But I have started to work through my potential role as a practitioner and what that might look like in the future. So I got a lot out of it. Here's some pictures from our class, our field trips. The top picture is our class at the Virginia Farm School conference. In the bottom left is half the class having fun in a 12-passenger van on the way to the conference. It was not in that fun van. And then on the bottom right here, that's our class at the garden we went to go see, the City Schoolyard Garden in Charlottesville. And then we closed out the semester with a potluck dinner at Kim's house, kind of just to celebrate our course and what we've learned and to share in good food and our own. We have a few more pictures of us at City Schoolyard Garden there.
And before we hit the last slide, this is Kim again. I just wanted to, I know we're getting 10 to 3 here, so we probably have, or we need to wrap up, but there's probably so much that we're missing in terms of how we did what and themes and approaches, but I think I just really appreciate Becca's comments about kind of bringing it back to what the students really wanted to learn out of the class. And I think that flexibility was always a negotiation, and the students were always, as you know, students are incredibly, wonderfully, you know, the graduate students have something to say about what they want to learn. So if we listen and we learn together, I think that was just a much more exciting experience, and it was I think it was a fun time together. But also with our community partners, the one thing I just wanted to mention before we go to the very last slide is that this work is ongoing with our narrative research, and that we have conducted these interviews, and we're continuing working with them. Actually, Becca works on that part of the project, and so it's not like we did the interviews and we never talked to them. There's quite a bit more engagement with them as we work towards actually bringing the stories back into the communities, and we're utilizing different ways. We're planning, and Nikki's about keeping us on track with our timeline. We'll be launching these and publicly announcing these and sharing these as an outcome of if you will, of the larger AFP. But the students have, you know, when you co-author, when you co-narrate, the students themselves were part of that conversation. So it's important that we really needed to recognize the variety of people involved in these stories that are being created and shared. So. You can hopefully look to that, more of that work in the future, but and particularly with our partners' voice at the table, as well as the students who helped create this. And thank you. And of course, want to know about the AFP, you can find us there at our Facebook site. And if you have any individual questions, you can contact us that way, or Nikki's always the ultimate point of contact for our AFP. So yeah, maybe we'll stop there and see where we go.
Thank you all for, this is Nikki, thank you all for that presentation. And we already have one question which will kick off. And if you have other questions, please start typing them into the chat box. Lindsay Day Farnsworth asks, how did you use the concepts or tools of the whole measures in the course?
Oh, that's a great question. The whole measures was brought, those of you who are maybe, if you're familiar with the whole measures for community food systems, it's one of our frameworks that we're using in the Appalachian Foodshed Project, particularly in our assessment work. And that was brought in a couple different ways. One, clearly, there's a whole week just describing how assessments are done and really locally in local communities. And if you all are familiar with the Community Food Security Coalition's previous, you know, copious amounts of years of experience and their publications, we brought that into the classroom to kind of hook our little wagon to a much larger train and show how what we're doing in the AFP has a long history. I mean, we're really following other people's great work, and so we wanted to highlight some of those frameworks. And so I know Nikki did a great job of doing that as a, you know, as a backdrop of, you know, this conversation. But then we brought in the whole measures when we went back to the City Schoolyard Garden with Jeanette Abinader, who is actually a co-author, lead author of that publication. And we talked a lot about how we can use measures in communities through our dialogue, how we can even think about using the language in those fields and practices in an everyday sense, as well as how we structure assessments. So I thought it came back to a very real place. And then the students were asked to use all the literature in the course and additional literature to analyze their narratives in the end. And I would say probably 90% of the students referred back to the whole measures as one way to pull out major thematics from the community practitioners' work. I hope that answers a little bit of your question.
Thanks, Kim. We have just a couple more minutes before we need to wrap up. So if there are any other questions, or if there's anything that's popped into your heads as you've been talking. Michelle, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I I think Kim did a great job in really explaining the depth of the course for the time that we have, as well as I appreciated hearing Becca's insights. I did see the email that folks would like to see the syllabus, and it looks like that's going to be made available where, Nikki? You said you might be able to post it on the website?
We can put it on the website in conjunction with this. This
Okay.
webinar is being recorded, so we'll put the link to the webinar as well as the presentation slides and any supporting materials like the syllabus or the poster. We can post that all together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So Kim, one quick question. Is there anything you would do differently next time when you teach this again?
Great question. I'd like to make it longer. Does that sound crazy? Never felt like we had enough time. I mean, Becca's like,
I don't think there was enough time to really get into things as in depth as I would have liked.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's so much. I mean, we spent about 3 weeks specifically on food justice and what that meant and how it is illustrated. I mean, we talked a lot about racism and the food system and, you know, those topics and undoing racism in the food system and you need to spend time. You need to, you know, really make space for that. And, you know, the 3 hours of once a week isn't enough. And so it sometimes feels like a false parameter or a false boundary that we create for ourselves. But at the same time, I feel like the students, you know, we're really just, I think that the culture of engagement was there from the beginning, and I owe that to the students really for making that happen. But we could have definitely spent more time to do a lot more stuff. So maybe a part 2, I don't know. I think that's maybe the best way to put it.
All right, well, look for part 2 of this course to happen soon, in a couple of years probably. But thank you all. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Becca, for sharing this with us. And hopefully those of you who have been listening and participating in this webinar have taken away a few things to put towards your own work. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email any of us. Or you can also go to our website, which is www.appalachianfoodshedproject.org. And again, the link and other supporting materials will be posted there. So thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.